My name is RealScaryLab, and this story takes place back in 2010 when I was working in Chongqing. I rented a small single room in a residential building. Although work left me tired, life was still full of experiences. Luckily, my top floor room gave me access to a huge rooftop, so every night, it became my personal gym. One night, while exercising on the rooftop, I heard the sound of a nearby window opening. For me, this signaled the start of something I felt compelled to do, something a bit shameful, perhaps, but I suspect many curious young men have done similar things. It was time for peeking. There was a flat adjacent to the rooftop, and I'd recently noticed a woman living there. I had no idea what she did for a living, only that she always returned home very late. She appeared to live alone, as I never saw anyone else enter or leave her flat. Perhaps because my rooftop perspective offered occasional glimpses into her life, I became quite fascinated during that period. I was very curious about who she was and what her life entailed. I asked the landlord about her several times, but he consistently claimed he didn't know anything. I don't know if my gaze was too obvious, but lately, I'd started to feel she might have noticed me peeking. Of course, I told myself I was just looking innocently. Whenever her eyes seemed to turn towards my direction, I would quickly duck out of sight. I continued watching her discreetly for several days. I noticed the woman seemed to stick to a routine, arriving home at a fixed time each day and then not emerging again. Thinking back, it seems comical how late I would wait just for a chance to peek. What was the point? But back then, boredom could make you do strange things. The turning point came one night when I returned from work very late. A particular job had kept a group of us working until around 2 in the morning. As I was walking home, I suddenly heard a very faint sound. It wasn't loud, but it was noticeable enough. I looked towards the source, the adjacent flat, the woman's place. There was movement inside. Isn't that her flat? I wondered. She returned a long time ago. Why isn't she asleep yet? What is she doing? My curiosity got the better of me. It was incredibly late, and no one else was around. Overcoming my apprehension, I crept closer to peek into her window. I half expected to see her sleeping or perhaps taking a bath. However, the situation was far beyond anything I could have anticipated. I saw the woman standing in the middle of her room in an incredibly strange position. She was bent deeply at the waist, her head hanging down so low it nearly touched the floor. She remained utterly still in this pose, one that seemed impossible for a person to hold naturally. The word hanging leaped into my mind. It was as if she was being held or suspended by some unseen force. I desperately tried to find a rational explanation. Maybe she was dancing, or doing some kind of extreme stretch. But none of it seemed plausible. Her toes barely seemed to be touching the floor, certainly not supporting her weight. Witnessing this utterly strange posture left me speechless. Then, I noticed something else that was incredibly strange. From my vantage point, looking down at her bent-over form, I could primarily see her chin, which seemed tilted upwards at an unnatural angle. Slowly, impossibly, her neck began to twist. Her head turned until she was looking directly at me, despite her body still facing the floor. Her head lolled backward completely, chin pointing straight up, revealing a pair of blood-red eyes staring right into mine. At that moment, my scalp prickled and went numb. Cold sweat drenched my forehead and dripped down. I was utterly terrified, more scared than I'd ever been. I scrambled backward in pure shock, lost my footing, and collapsed onto the rooftop floor. My mind couldn't comprehend what I had just witnessed. As I lay there, a terrible thought struck me. What if she came out onto the rooftop? I stared fixedly at her window, terrified she might crawl out. Fortunately, she didn't appear again, which allowed me a small measure of relief. After what felt like a long time, I struggled to my feet, intending to escape the rooftop. But youth and perhaps foolish energy took over. A part of me felt I couldn't just run away. Did ghosts really exist? Could something like this truly happen, even to a young, supposedly fearless guy? Fueled by the strange mix of fear and bravado, I forced myself back to the window and looked inside again. Then, something else strange occurred. The woman was gone. The room was completely empty, almost as if she had never been there. I wondered where she could possibly be. How could she just disappear? Confused and still unnerved, I leaned closer, pressing my face near the glass to search the room more thoroughly. At that precise moment, something dark filled my vision. Instantly, I felt my blood run cold. It was the most terrifying sight of my life. The woman's ghastly pale face was right there, on the other side of the window pane, inches from mine. Her eyes were full of blood. Her lips peeled back into a terrifying grin. Then, her mouth began to open, stretching wider and wider, impossibly large, as if lunging towards me through the glass. As she pressed closer, her pupils seemed to shrink into tiny dots. This sudden, horrific stimulus absolutely petrified me. I lurched back so violently I nearly tumbled off the edge of the building. I scrambled away, fleeing the rooftop as fast as my legs could carry me. Yet, even as I ran, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was following me, watching me. I didn't dare return to my room. I spent the entire night hiding in the darkness outside. I had hoped the terror would fade with the daylight, but I didn't expect the horror to continue in a different form the next morning. Having barely slept due to working late followed by the night's events, I finally crashed in bed and didn't wake up until around 10 a.m. When I went out, I bumped into the landlord. Perhaps he'd heard my commotion the night before, because he greeted me rather unpleasantly. "You young fool," he grumbled. "What's this talk about ghosts?" I nodded nervously, trying to deflect blame. Naturally, I wouldn't admit to peeking. "Uncle, landlord, it wasn't me. It must have been a woman," I said, vaguely gesturing towards the adjacent flat, the strange woman living there. The landlord stared at me, completely baffled. "Woman," he replied, his face serious. "I've been managing this place for more than 10 years. Where are you seeing a woman? That flat is empty. You're young, stop filling your head with this nonsense." I was stunned by his answer. His earnest expression convinced me he wasn't lying. If that flat was truly empty, then what, or who, had I seen during the night? The realization hit me, and I broke out in a cold sweat all over again. I moved out of that rental house as soon as I possibly could. Even after moving away, for a long time, I was afraid to go out after dark. Every night, I couldn't help but remember that woman's horrifying face staring back at me. Okay, that's the story. I'm Uncle, RealScaryLab. See you in the next video.